All right, this next question is from Mark Matsusalem in Canada. Mark, hope I said your last name correctly. Mark asks, hey Grime, I'm curious on how needle taper affect the application in skin. Why should we choose certain tapers in certain situations? There seem to be lots of explanations out there, but I'm curious how you see this. Thanks in advance, Mark.
All right, Mark. I think it's a pretty broad one. I think we can talk about this. I'll try not to get too long in the tooth. I different needle tapers. All right. Well, I think for one, it depends on what type of machine you're running with. Uh, if you're talking about a zippy little hard hitter liner, like let's say a Rollomatic or something, I would personally, never use a medium taper textured mag because it's really aggressive needle and then you have an aggressive machine and I don't know what the benefits would be. I think you would do more damage or potentially. Okay, let me back that up. You might be able to put in a good line or somebody might be able to put in a good line. So somebody out there going like, I use that works great. And that's cool because there's no single way to tattoo effectively. There's lots of different ways that people do and get great results that defy how I work, and I can't tattoo like that, right? Like, and it doesn't mean it's not good. It just means that I don't know how to do it. And I'm just talking from my experience of what I find works good for me, and some of that's informed by my own shortcomings in technique. I feel like I learned technique pretty well in the first part of my tattooing, but everyone tattoos differently. That said, I wouldn't use a medium taper textured needle for a zippy little liner because of the aggression between the machine and the liner. I think you would get the same kind of result from a polished liner with probably less trauma. So I don't know why you would want to choose that because you have more risk in that area, right? It's not that it won't work for some people, it's just maybe sometimes it won't turn out the way you want it to. And maybe if you use the polished pin, it might turn out really good, the vast majority of the time. And over here, one side you're working at 98%, success rate, and over here you're looking at 84% success rate, right? I don't know, just making numbers up, obviously. So that's one thing I wouldn't choose, right? Like if you're going to use a really short stroke, little aggressive coil machine or something, for a liner, I would go toward a polished pin because I think they just work better for lines and just the way they introduce and the way they hit, the way the machine hits. It has more to do with the machine in some of those instances than the pins. I find too, because black is so thin, right? It's not as viscous as most color pigments, that a polished pin or a longer taper needle works very effective in introducing it into the skin versus a thicker viscous colored pigment. Maybe you have to run the machine, you have to pull a line slower, or you have to run it maybe in a different machine to get a better result with the line with a colored pigment, right? So I think some of that is, you have two things, maybe three, but the two main things I would look at is what machine you're going to use to do the thing you want to do, and then what pigment are you using in that area to do the thing you want to do, right? And then the third might be a little bit of body location and age of person or skin types, right? Like maybe you don't want to run a big power liner with a super hard hitting machine with the most concentrated black with a textured needle on the inside of somebody's bicep because maybe in 5 years the whole inside of the bicep is blown out black. I don't know. That can happen in that kind of like really soft skin. You just get spider runs out and that's a wrap. You can't do anything about it. You don't want to run some dynamic concentrate in there because you're going to just end up with a hazy bluish black bicep. I traditionally choose polished pins a little bit, what we're going to call them standard taper on the liners, and then long taper for tight needles and very tight needles, and then a bug pin for the super tight little bitty guys. I like those for lines. I have good results with lines with that. I've lined with medium taper rounds that we have, the hollows and stuff. And for me, I can do it. It's just sometimes I feel like it's a little aggressive on the skin for me with the machines, and I don't get the best results. I get results that I would have just gotten better results with a polish pen. So I don't choose to use them. Same thing with filling in solid black. I don't like a medium taper to fill in solid black. I know some people do. When I try to shade in solid black with a medium taper, I have a little bit of difficulty getting a super saturated, smooth black before I start getting maybe a little bit of skin damage. So I like a long taper for coloring in black, or maybe even a bug pen, depending on the machine type, right? Coil, pen machine, there's variations, right? But those, and skin types. So that's how I choose. And when I do color, I basically exclusively use a medium taper textured pen, because I find it delivers the pigment the fastest and the most effectively. And that's just what I feel. You can get it, you can color in with our medium taper, and our long taper are both textured. So you can color in with the long taper, but I find when I go from, for instance, when we first did the cartridges, the machine, the pen machines, they're rotaries, they're direct drive. They have no give like a coil. They don't back off, they don't do anything. The only thing change you're gonna get and how they hit is your voltage in your hand. So if you're kind of aggressive in your tattooing, like I'm aggressive when I tattoo, relatively, I was having, I was working with the long taper with those machines, and I thought, hell, these color in pretty good. I fear that if we make a medium taper cartridge, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to damage the skin, because maybe they're not going to be able to adjust like I can, or, because I have a lot of experience tattooing. I have a lot of more workarounds than somebody tattooing a quarter of the time that I have. It's just the way experience works. So I was like, well, I can't expect everyone else to be able to navigate that in that moment where I might be able to navigate it. I might not be a problem for me. And then everyone else is going to, or people are going to say, hey man, this thing sucks and this does that. And be like, I'm not trying to, critique your ability to problem solve that or how it works, but that was a worry. So we were doing that for a while, but in coil, I always use a medium taper textured mag for color, because I found it to be by far the faster, better pigment packer. So we tried some in the pen machine cartridges later, and I found for me they work great, and I said I didn't have any problems about working the skin, etc. So I said we need to make these too, because I always felt that was the way. I was just a little bit afraid that people were going to have issues with it. That said, I always recommend a medium taper textured mag for color. I reckon if you were doing crazy subtle color fades everywhere and you wanted, to run 4 different shades of a color in a small section, you might want to run a long taper, because you're going to get a more feathery changing, that kind of thing. If you're doing anything that's like Japanese or traditional, or anything that's a little more basic, I think the medium taper is a way to go. I also believe in a harder, faster tattoo heals better than I'm going to turn my machine down, I'm going to mess around in the skin a little too long. That always heals harder than going hard once and you did it saturated, done, don't mess with it again. It should heal really well. And yeah, that's kind of my general philosophy on choosing pin types according to what I'm trying to achieve.